Guys, please stop using Dotenv in your Rust projects. You are now using a real programming language, not like JavaScript or Python. Those are languages for kids, am I right? You are now using a real programming language for a project that's probably, because it's written in Rust, probably is going to be used around all over the globe, used by many people, deployed on many machines. So stop using Dotenv. Instead, write your own config files. And today I'm going to show you how we are going to create our own configuration for our Rust project. So here I have a basic project, and the dependencies we are going to need for today is cert. That's the current version that's available, the newest version with the derive feature. And we are going using toml. Toml is a crate that allows us to create a struct out of the toml file that we are going to have as our configuration. Because we are using toml as our configuration file, you could use JSON or any other like YAML if you like, but for configuration I like toml because it's the easiest one. It has tables and fields and it's just more structured. I just like it more, but you can do whatever you'd like. So back to our main RS, the first thing we are going to do is we are going to create the config object, which is config, and it's just our custom config struct. So therefore we are going to create a config file that's just already imported into our main file. We did not yet create it, but this is just so we can have access to it. So the file should be like config rs. Let's make it a split and put the main rs in here and the config rs on the other side. And make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in here we have a public struct, which we are going to config, which is the struct we are going to access in here. And this config has fields. Now we have to think like what kind of fields you have in your in your config struct. This is depending on whatever like way you're intended to use .env, like what configuration your Rust application might need. It could be like a username and password, for example, for the database. Let's add this in here, string, and then let's also add an API key, maybe using a third-party service where there's an API key. And also if you're using JWT, there might be a secret token that you are going to use. So let's just have a secret token in here, and we are gonna derive debug because we are gonna print it in here so we know what kind of value config is. So to be able to print something, you have to derive the debug trait, and we are going to make it prettier like that and add config in here and remove the print line statement. For the code to compile, we also need to implement a new function to our config struct. Let's make it like public fn new, which returns itself, and then we have like config, which is just an empty string. For now, let's use toOwned instead toString, and let's make password, API key, and then the secret token. So now this should work. We have the mod config, so we are using our like what's called module, our config.rs, and we're gonna import the config struct into our main rs. So let's make it like that and a little bit bigger so you can see a little bit more. And we are going into the project. It's in my project folder, YouTube, and then config.toml, and then we can cargo.run. And now we can see that this is our config. It's only empty strings. And we have also like that code in here. That's because we're gonna have to add public to everything in here. It's public password, so it doesn't because we want to have access of those fields in our application, whatever, like Actix Web, if you're creating a web server and you have like global data, you can pass the generated config variable to the app state or app data, what's called in Actix Web, or whatever like project you're going to do. And now everything is public. So now we have to create the config file. The config file should be something like in our root project, like config.toml. Let's make it a little bit bigger. And we're gonna have some tables. The first one should be database, because we have our username and we have our password. And let's just make it a real safe password. Then another table should be like our API key. Maybe I'm using a third-party service like Google, I don't know. So API key should be something like Google API key. And then JWT in here should be secret token. And secret. Let's just call it secret. So with this, I have 3 tables. And you don't have to have 3 tables. You can basically have no tables, but Toml allows us to have tables, and I like those tables because they give structure to our configuration file, and I just like it because I think it's easier, but whatever floats your boat, you can make it however you would like. So for now we want to read the Toml file, we want to read the configuration file. And therefore, in the new function, we are going to create an array of all the possible directories, file paths, where the configuration file could be stored. Because it could be either in the current directory, if it's in a dev environment, it could be in the config and the dots files, or it could be in the root directory where the package manager installed a configuration file. Like, there are many different locations where a config file could be. So let's just say config.filepaths, and let's just close this one. And this one is an array of, what is it, strings. And how many do we have? 2. Let's just make 2. You can, like, 2 paths. And the first one should be like something dot in this current directory, config.toml, or config but with an uppercase. So we have those 2 cases, and we can add more. We can add, like I said, like our dots directory, which should be something like this, .config. Whatever project you are creating, like, don't know, like Google downloader .config.toml, something like that. And then the last one could be also uppercase. Whatever. Like, we are going to focus on only those 2 directories, but you can add as many as you want. So now we're going to loop over this array. So file path in config, file paths. And what we are going to do is we're going to read. We're going to create a string out of this config.toml file. So not for let result, I'm going to name it result, because the function we're going to use is returning a result. We are going to use read to string, and the path should be file path. And it's a result that either returns a string or returns an error. And the error is an error that we are going to use from standard IO error, but rename it as IO error. This is just me. I like to give types to all the variables I'm creating. It's not something you have to do. You can just like ignore the type, but I think it's more easier to understand like what kind of data we are dealing in our project. So this is something from TypeScript I've kind of adopted in my workflow. So we have the standard IO. We're also going to need the standard.fs, the file system, and well, that's it for now. And it's either a result or an error. So if it's a string, if it's something, a value, it's like a result dot is what's called okay. We don't need those parentheses. So if result is okay, then we're just going to break out of it. But before that, we are going to set the variable content, which is of string. Well, it's an empty string. But if we find something, if we find a config file, then we're gonna say content is a new value. It should be also mutable. Is a new value that's result.unwrap. So, yes, now we have unwrapped the result. We're gonna break out of the loop, and now we are gonna console log the content so we can see what we've done, like if it was successful or not. So content, and yes, in the main RS, we are gonna console log also the config. So let's see if that worked. So now we see the configuration we've just created with database, Google, JWT, and at the end, we have our config struct. So with this, where is it in config.rs? So now we have to create a Rust struct, like a data type out of the string. And we are going to do that with creating a new variable. And we are gonna, what we're going to config.toml, something like that, we're going to call it. And it is of type config.toml we are going to create in a moment. So we are using the toml create, and we use the function from string, not from string, from str. And this one should be the content. So this one, yeah, it doesn't return config.toml, but it does return a result. That's either one of those. So what we are going to do is we're going to unwrap or else. And we are going to say unwrap or else. And if it failed to read to create the config.toml struct object out of the string, we are going to notify the user. And we're going to say something like failed to create config.toml object out of config file. And we are going to return, because we want it to be a config.toml object, but struct, but we didn't create it yet. So let's just do that, and let's just create a struct. It doesn't have to be public, and I'm gonna name it config.toml, which has 3 tables in it. It has database, and what was the name? Google, and JWT. Those need also to derive serialize and deserialize and debug, because we want to console log, we want to print it in the console. And it has database, Google, and JWT. But those fields are all optionable. Like the user might not use any of those tables, or it might not use the Google table. So therefore we say it's optionable, and the fields will be none when we create the config.toml struct. And at the end we are going to create the config struct out of those this config.toml if it's some or none. If it's none, we're going to use some default values. So our configuration file can look like anything. It doesn't really matter, and the user can add fields that are going to be ignored, or they can remove fields that they're not going to use. So database is of type. Now, if we go back to the toml file, it has 2 fields, so it has to be another struct. And this one we are going to name config.toml database. Yes, database. And this one is config.toml Google. And the last one is config toml jwt. So now we have to create those three structs, those three tables. It's going to derive, serialize, and deserialize and debug. We also need to import serialize and deserialize from the third. Create, serialize, deserialize. And we also are using toml, so we need to import toml. So let's create the, what is it, the first one, the config toml database. Database has three fields, not three fields, two fields. Username, which is also optionable. It could be nothing. The user could like forget to add or mistype username, and now it's none. So we don't want our server to crash. We want it to handle it appropriately. Notify the user that we're going to use the default values. So username is optionable, as well as everything we're going to add here. Everything is an option. It could be either something or none. And it's also from string. So now we are going to make the same with Google and database. Not database, JWT. And in here we have the API key, and in here we have the secret token. Did I name it secret token? Yeah, I named it secret token. Okay, so now we have everything. So the default now, in if toml from string fails, should be, well, database should be none. Google as well, because we couldn't create the config file. We don't know yet what the defaults should be. The defaults we are going to determine later. So JWT is also none. So now we've created the config.toml. So now we have the struct. We have the config.toml struct, which has all the values we are going to need. The database, Google, JWT, and all its subcategories like username, password, API key, secret token. This is going to be great with the toml function. Where is it? Where's the toml function? In here. That's the toml function. This toml function from string is going to create the config toml object. And, well, now we need to make sure that we need to check all of those values. We need to check if the database is correct. We need to check if the Google is correctly or is none. If not, if it's none, then we are going to use default values. So the first thing in database, we have two values. We have the username and the password, which is of type string. So what we are going to do is we're going to match from config toml object, and we're going to match, what is it, database. We've named it database. So database can be either something, let's call it database, or it could be none. So we are going to return some default values, something like unknown to owned, and another unknown for the password, because keep in mind we've created a tuple, so we have to return a tuple, like two values and like two strings unknown. Those are the defaults. Like we don't know what you wanted them to be, so let's just say the default is unknown. But the default could be anything, like user and password. Like the default one, maybe you're in a dev environment and you wanted to give it a default value that could that automatically works in a dev environment. So if the database is something, so now we are going to get those values, but also check them before. Well, they could be none. Database is, in this case, is not none, but all those fields like username and password, they could be none. So let's make it, well, it's a string, and it's in database dot username, and we're gonna unwrap it but this might fail. So we're going to say or else. Or else, we're going to notify the, we're going to notify the user, and we are going to say like missing field username in table, also table database. So the user knows like there's a missing field that should be there, but it's not a problem. It's just like, here, there's something missing. We're going to use the default one. So the default one should be whatever you would like. I use unknown, so we can immediately see that it used the default value instead of the values we set in the configuration file. So unknown, it should be a string, not an SDR, and we need to do the same with the password. It's the same, but what a password? Unwrap or else. Here. And this one is the same. And we're going to say missing field password. And then we are returning db username and db password. And this should work. Now we can print username and password to see if that worked. Username, password. Let's see. No, we have errors. Unwrap or else takes 0 arguments. Expected closure that takes 1 argument. Okay. Another problem. Serial. Oh. Okay. Well, I didn't write serialize correctly. So one problem was that this toml.unwrap or else takes an argument, but we are going to ignore it, and then we're gonna correctly write serialize. And I write it correctly in here, serialize. Okay, now it should work. Oh, I'm missing semicolon in print line. Yes. Where's the missing semicolon? I don't see it. Oh, it should be. Where is it? On line 80. Oh, here. Also, like if this is none, we also should notify the user that probably they forgot the field, not the field, the missing table. The table, missing table database. So now this should work. Yes. And now we can see the password, the username and the password we've written in the config file. So now we can add this one here, username and password. Now we just need to do the same with API key and the secret token. So we're gonna match config toml.google, and we're gonna say if it's something, if it's Google, then we are going to return the API key, google.api key, but this one is an option, it could be none, so we unwrap it, or we are going to return something the default. If it's none, we're going to return the default. The default should be unknown to owned or to string. You can use to string or to owned, it doesn't really matter. I've read somewhere that to owned is less heavy, so I use to owned, but you can also use to string, it doesn't really matter. So missing, what was the wording I've used? Missing field password. Okay, missing field API key in table Google. And we were gonna return unknown. And it could be also none. If it's none, yeah, then it means that the table is missing. So we're gonna print line and say missing table Google. And we're gonna return unknown to owned. And that's it. That's our API key. Let's add the API key in here. And now the last one should be the secret token. String. And this one is match. What's it called? Config toml.jwt. It's either some or none. So if it's none, it's the same. But we're missing table JWT. If it's some, we are going to say JWT dot secret token unwrap or else we're going to say the default one. Yes. So missing field secret token in JWT. And now we add it in here, and it should be it. You can add more fields to it. We could add an is def. It should be something like true or false, whatever. But for now, we are leaving it as it is. But there also could be, yes, there are. A semicolon, there shouldn't be one. Well, that's an easy fix. There shouldn't be one semicolon, and in here there shouldn't be one, and now it should work. Nope. Now there's a semicolon missing. And line 105. Let's go to 105, yes. And now it should work, yes. So now we have created our config object, which has everything: the username, password, API key, secret token. And now this config object we've created, we can pass it to like I said, we could add it to the ActiveSwap if you're using ActiveSwap or Rocket or any other web framework to create a web server. I think they all have like a way to add a global state to it, so you can just add it in here. In ActiveSwap, it would be something like this one, just a closure, and then you have the app, and you're gonna add something like app data, and then you have web.data.new, something like that. I don't know, but you know, like you can do anything with it. Like in here you can pass then the config, something like that, but whatever. Like, it doesn't really matter. Now you have created your own .env, like your own configuration. You don't need to use .env anymore, and you can make it more robust, more stable, and more user-friendly by using the toml file. Let's do some testing, because we've not done it yet. When we added the database, we can like change those keys, those fields, and if so, everything should be unknown. And now if we like change those table names, it should have the same effect, because we now can't read, and we have information in the console like missing table, database, Google, JWT. Let's add JWT and Google, and now we can see that the values are correct, but for username and password, they are unknown, and we have a notification like missing table, database. And if we just write database correctly and run our server again, it works. So no need to use .env. Just create your own configuration, and that's it. Like, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please like or subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And if you have some feedback, post it in the comments, like new videos. I want to do more stuff on Rust that I'm passionate about. And well, bye, I guess.